Hi there. So we're on Chapter 5 of Baron Trump's marvelous underground journey. You remember in Chapter 4, the old lady that was leading him the way with two helpers had been chased away by two other men, leaving him alone. So we went back down into the valley and absconded with a pair of oxen after untying their yokes. And the oxen are leading him up the mountain. So let's get into Chapter 5. We'll see how much we can cover today. We'll jump over here. Boom. There we go. Let's begin. Generally speaking, people with large heads are fitted out with nature, but with a pair of rather pipe-stemmy legs. But such was not my case. I was blessed with legs of the sturdiest sort, and found no difficulty in keeping pace with my new four-footed friends, who, to my delight, were not long in convincing me that they had been there before. Not for an instant did they halt at any fork in the path, but kept continually on the move, often passing over stretches of ground where there was no trail visible, but coming upon it again with unfailing accuracy. Once only they halted, and that was to slake their thirst at a mountain rill, Bulger and I following their example. It was only too evident to me that they had in mind a certain grazing ground, and were resolved to be satisfied with no other. So I let them have their own way, for as it was, still up, I felt that it was perfectly safe to follow their lead. At last the mountainside began to take on quite another character. The gorges grew narrower, and at times overhanging rocks shut out the sunlight almost entirely. We were entering a region of peculiar wildness, of fantastic grandeur. I had often read of what travelers termed the quarries of the demons in the northern Urals, but never till now had I the faintest notion of what that expression meant. Imagine to yourself the usual look of ruin and devastation around and about a quarry worked by human hands. Then your thoughts conceive every chip to be a block, and every block a mass, and 4 times its size to every slab and post and pediment, and then turn a mighty torrent through the place and roll and twist and lift them up in wild confusion, end on end, and on each other piled, till these wild waters have builded fantastic portals to temples more fantastic, and arched wild gorges with roofs of rock which seemed to hang so lightly that a breath or footfall might bring them down with a terrible crash. And then, dear friends, you may succeed in getting a faint idea of the wild and awful grandeur of the scene which now lay spread out before me. With the cattle that now led Bulger and me so safely up the mountainside, nowhere to find an entrance to this wilderness of broken rock, and what was more important still, would they once engaged within its winding courts and corridors, its darkened maze of wall and parapet, its streets and plazas roughly paved as if by demon hands impatient of the task, know how to find their way out again. Dear friends, man has always been too distrustful of his four-footed companions. They have much that they might tell us, had they but speech to tell it with. I have often trusted them when it would have seemed foolhardy to you, and never once have I had cause to repent of doing so. So, Bulger and I, with stout hearts, followed straight after these silent guides, although I must confess my legs were beginning to feel the terrible strain I had put them to. But I resolved to push on ahead, at least until we had cleared the demon's quarry, and then to bring my little head to a halt and pass the rest of the day and night season in well-earned repose. Once within the quarry, however, all sense of fatigue vanished, and my thankful mind, entranced and fascinated by the deep silence, the awful grandeur, the mysterious lights and shadows of the place, lent me new strength. At length we had traversed this city of silence and gloom, and once again we emerged into the full glory of the afternoon sun. Suddenly my little drove of cattle, with playful tossing of their heads, broke into a run, Bulger and I at their heels. However, it was a mad race, but, dear friends, when it ended, I took off my fur cap and tossed it high into the air with a wild cry of joy, and Bulger broke out in a string of yelps and barks. For look ye, the cattle were grazing away for dear life there in front of me, and as their breath reached my keen nostrils, recognized the odor of Juliana's herbs, which she found bound on my hurt head. Yes, we stood almost upon the brink of the giant's well, but I was too tired to take another step further, too tired, in fact, to eat, although I had a stock of dried fruit in my pockets, and noticed that the nests of wild fowl were well supplied with eggs. Yuck. Having unloosened the tackle from the back of the good beast, and had it carried up the mountain for me, I threw myself on the ground and was soon fast asleep, with my faithful Bulger coiled up close against my breast. In the morning the cattle were nowhere to be seen, but I didn't trouble myself about them, for I knew that old Juliana would be sent up after them the moment they were missed. After a hearty breakfast on a half-dozen roasted eggs of the wild fowl, with some dried fruit and winter-green berries, Bulger and I advanced to the edge of the Giant's Well, or rather the edge of the vast terraces of rock leading down to it, each of which was from 30 to 50 feet in sheer height. Before I go any further, dear friends, I must beg you to remember that I am an expert in the use of tackle, there being no knot, noose, or splice known to a sailor which I didn't have at my fingers' ends, a fact not to be wondered at when you take into consideration the thousands of miles which I have traveled on water. Nor would I have you shake your heads and look only half persuaded when I go on describing our descent into the Giant's Well, for of course you'll be asking yourselves how I succeeded in getting the tackle down there when there was no one left at the other end to untie it. Know then that was the smallest of my troubles, for any sailor will tell you you only need to tie your line in what is known as a fool's knot, to one end which you make fast a mere cord. The moment you have reached the bottom, a sharp tug on the cord unties the fool's knot, and your tackle falls down after you. My method was to lower Bulger down first, and then let myself down after him. In this way we proceeded from parapet to parapet, until at last we stood upon the very edge of the vast well, the existence of which had been so mysteriously hinted at in Don Fum's manuscript. Its mouth was probably 50 feet in width, and by my straining eyes I satisfied myself of the existence of the shelf rock on one side, as nearly as I could judge about 75 feet down. It was a goodly stretch, and would require every foot of my rope. You will not smile, I'm sure, when I tell you that I pressed Bulger to my breast and kissed him fondly before lowering away. He returned my caresses, and by his joyous yelp gave me to understand that he had perfect faith in his little master. In a few moments I had joined him on the narrow shelf of rock. Below us now was darkness, but think you I hesitated? I knew that my eyes would soon become accustomed to the gloom, and I also knew that when my eyes failed, Bulger's keener ones were there to help me out. I rigged my tackle now with extra care, for I was really lowering my little brother on a short trip of discovery. He was soon out of sight, and then in spite of my calmness I drew a quick breath, and my heart started upward a barley corn or so. But hark! His quick, sharp bark comes plainly to me. It means that he has landed upon a safe shelf or ledge. In the next moment my legs encircled the rope, and I began to glide noiselessly down into the stilly depths, his glad voice ringing in my ears. Again and again I sent my wise and watchful brother down ahead of me, until at last, standing there and looking up, naught remained to me of the mighty outside world but a bright silver speck, like a tiny ray of light streaming through a pinhole in the curtains of your chamber. But stop, we have reached the bottom of the Giant's Well. Have we reached the bottom of the Giant's Well? For with a trial plummet I find that the walls are no longer sheer, they slope inward, and gently so, almost so much so that I hardly need a line to continue my descent. Lighting one of my little candles, I make my way cautiously around the edge. In half an hour I find myself back at the starting place. To curve the path had always been the same, while my trial plummet at all times had indicated the same slope to the rocky basin, and then for the first time 2 certain words made use of by that learned master of masters, Don Fum. Till then a mystery to me stood out before my eyes, as if written with a pen of fire upon those black walls, thousands of feet below the great world of light which I had quitted a few hours before. Those words were Polyphemus Funnel. Yes, there could be no doubt of it. I had reached the bottom of the Giant's Well. I stood upon the edge of the Polyphemus Funnel. Wow. Okay, we're at 10 minutes. Let's do another chapter, okay? Chapter 6. The rocky sides of Polyphemus' funnel were apparently as well polished as those of any tin funnel that I had ever seen hanging in the kitchen of Castle Trump. So making fast my tackle and taking Bulger in my arms, away we went, sliding down the side with a line passed under my arm for safety's sake. It was nearly 100 feet to the bottom, for I had measured off a full length of my line before I come to the apex of this gigantic cone. and not caring to tumble headlong down its pipe, I proceeded to light a taper and look about me. Ah, dear friends, I can feel that shudder now, so terrible was it. And wonder, too, for a glance at the pipe of the funnel told me that it was too small to let my body pass through. The agonizing thought flashed through my mind that I had committed a terrible error, that I had mistaken some vast pit for the giant's well, and that I had thrown Bulger's and my own life away in mad and unreasoning haste, that I should never reach that wonderful world within a world, that there in that thick gloom must lay our bodies and bones. Or thought I, may not the learned master of masters Don Fum have made an error himself in holding out the idea that the pipe of Polyphemus's funnel was large enough to admit a passage of a man's body. In my almost frenzy, I advanced to the mouth of the pipe, and lowering myself into it, let my body sink as far as it would. It caught at the shoulders, and after a careful examination, I was forced to reach the brain-racking conclusion that my faithful Bulger and I had traveled our last mile together. There was nothing for us to do but lie down and die. Lie down and die? Never! I had noticed in making the descent into the giant's well that its side had much the appearance of being walled around by blocks of stone. With Bulger strapped to my back, I would slowly climb up from shelf to shelf until my strength failed me, and then I would wait until I thought old Juliana had come back to gather herbs, and possibly I might make her hear me. In my despair, I sighed and clutched my own arms, and as I did so, one of my hands came into contact with something cold and slippery, having the feel of tallow. Taking a pinch of the substance between my thumb and finger, I rubbed it thoughtfully for a moment, and then a ray of hope broke through an awful gloom that enshrouded me so piteously. It was black lead. There could be no doubt of it. It had made its way through a crack or crevice in Polyphemus's funnel, and I had rubbed it off, sliding down the side. With this greasy material to rub on the inside of the pipe, the funnel, and also to besmear myself with, mayhap I might slip through the world into the world within a world. At any rate, I determined to make the trial, even if I left some of my skin on the flinty rock. In order to collect my thoughts thoroughly, and that I might proceed step by step in that systematic order to characteristic all of my wonderful exploits, I sat down, and putting my arm around dear Bulger's neck and drawing him up against me, I communed myself for a good half hour. There you go. Okay, and this is the next one. Oh, it continues. This is a picture before Her Majesty Galaxa, Queen of the Mechamenkes. Okay. Then all was in readiness for action, and to prove to you, dear friends, how careful Bulger was not to interrupt my train of thought, I have to report to you that although a small animal of the rat family came out of a crevice in the rock while I was sat there thinking, I could see by the light of my tiny wax paper, and he had the temerity first to sniff at Bulger's tail and then give it a playful nip. Yet the sagacious animal never budged a hair's breadth. Mine hath ordered, now let's hands obey, I exclaimed, as I sprang up, began stripping off my outer garments. This done, I clambered up on the side of the funnel and began to collect a supply of the black lead, which I deposited near the opening of the pipe. The next thing to do was to get Bulger through the pipe ahead of me. To this end I tied him up in my clothing, bag fashion, and began to lower away. After paying out 65 or 70 feet of the line, he struck bottom, and by his loud barking gave me to understand that it was all rigid, that I might make the descent myself. Upon hearing his voice, I gave the line a few sharp tugs. He was not slow to comprehend my meaning, and in a moment or so had not only scrambled out of the bag himself, but pulled my clothing loose, so that I might draw the line up again. My next step was to contrive a way to wait myself when the moment arrived to begin the descent, for I felt sure that I never should be able to arrange it so as to slip through the pipe unless something was pulling at my heels. Cutting off about 10 feet of the rope, I made a fast one end of the piece to a long piece of rock, weighing about 100 pounds. This I laid near the mouth of the pipe, ready for use. But now came the most difficult thing of all. It was to draw my shoulders in on my breast and lash them securely in that position. by which plan I expected to reduce my width by at least 2 good inches. These 2 inches thus gained, or rather lost, might be the means by which I would be able to slip through the pipe of Polyphemus's funnel, and reach the vast underground passage leading to the world within a world. Putting a noose around my chest, just below the collarbone, I drew my shoulders in as tight as I could bear and changed the slip knot into a hard one. Then, having made the other end of the line fast to the side of the funnel, I proceeded to wind myself up as the housewives often do a big sausage to keep it from bursting. This done, I set about rolling in the black lead until I was thoroughly smeared with it. There was now but one thing more to do before dropping myself into the pipe, and that was to make fast the weight to my feet. It was no easy task, wound up as I was with my arms lashed down against my body, but by the use of the slip knots I finally accomplished the feat, and sitting down, put my legs into the pipe and drew a long breath, for I felt as if I was skewered up in a straitjacket. Bending down, I called out to Bulger. He answered with a yelp of joy that brought fresh vigor to my heart. Now was come the supreme moment which was to witness success or failure. Failure, oh, what a dread word that is, and yet how often must humans pronounce it, and in doing so breathe out the sigh in which it ends. Quickly lowering the weight, I wriggled off the edge of the opening, straightened myself out as I slipped into the pipe. Had I stopped like a cork, or was I moving? Yes, down, gently, slowly, noiselessly, I went slipping through the pipe up to Polyphemus's funnel. What did I care how that weight caused the line to cut into my ankles? I was moving. I was drawing nearer and nearer to Bulger, whose joyous bark I could hear now and then, nearer to the inner gates of the world within a world. But woe is me! I suddenly stopped, and in spite of all my efforts to start again, twisting and turning and shaking my body, I refused to sink into the wrench, and there I stick. "Oh, Bulger, Bulger," I moaned, "faithful friend, if thou couldst but reach me, one tug thee might save thy little master." In a sort of wild and desperate way, I now began to feel about me as well as I could with my hands wedged in so close to my sides, but in a moment or so I had discovered the cause of my coming to such a sudden standstill. I had struck a portion of the pipe that had a thread to it, like that which encircles a bolt of iron and makes a screw of it. And the thought came to me that I could finally succeed in giving a revolving motion to my body. I would, with every turn, twist myself farther down towards the end of the pipe. I could feel that my knuckles and fingertips were being bruised and lacerated by this arduous work. But what cared I for the keen pain that darted from hands and wrist to elbows? It was like twisting a screw slowly through a long nut. Only the thread in this case was on the nut, and the grooves in the screw, and that screw was my poor bruised little body. All of a sudden, by the swinging of the weight, I could tell that it had passed out of the lower end of the pipe. It was pulling cruelly hard on my tender ankles, but I could twist myself no more. My strength was gone. I was at the point of swooning when I heard Bulger utter a loud yelp, and the next instant there was such a strong tug at my ankles that I sent forth a groan, but that tug saved me. It was Bulger who had leaped into the air, catching the rope in his teeth, and had dragged his little master out of the pipe of Polyphemus's funnel. We all fell into the same heap, Bulger, I, and the weight, fully 10 feet, and very serious might have been the consequences for me had my fall not been broken by my striking on a pile of my clothing placed directly into the opening. And, dear friends, if you talk until the crack of doom, you could not make me believe that my 4-footed brother hadn't placed those clothes there to catch me. They weren't thrown higgledy-piggledy into a heap either, but were laid one upon the other in the heaviest at the bottom. Having unwound myself and lighted one of my wax tapers, I made haste to cast away the undergarment with its coating of black lead and resume my clothing. Then, stooping down, I made an examination of the floor. It was composed of huge blocks of marble of various colors, polished almost as smooth as the hand of a man who wrought the work. And then I knew that I was on nature's marble highway, leading to the cities of the underworld which Don Fum had mentioned in his book. And I remembered, too, that he had spoken of nature's mighty mosaics, huge fantastic figures on the walls of these lofty corridors, made up of various colored blots and fragments laid one upon the other as if with design, and not by the wild tempestuous whims of upbursting forces thousands of years ago. when the earth was in its mad and wayward youth. After a rest of several hours, during which I nursed my torn hands and bruised fingers, Bulger and I were up and off again along this broad and glorious marble highway. Strange to say, it was not the inky darkness of the ordinary cavern which filled these magnificent chambers through which the marble highway went, winding in stately and massive grandeur. Far from it. The gloom was tempered with a faint glow that met us on the way ever and anon, like a ray of twilight gone astray. Anyway, Bulger, I noticed I could see perfectly well. So, tying a bit of twine to his collar, I sent him on ahead, convinced that I could have no surer guide. At times our path would be lighted up for an instant by the bursting out of a little tongue of flame, either on the side of or from the roof of the gallery. I was puzzled for quite a while to tell what it proceeded from, but at last I caught the sight of the source, or rather the maker, of this welcome illumination. It proceeded from a lizard-like animal which by suddenly uncoiling its tail had the power to emit this extremely bright flash of fluorescent light, and in so doing made a sharp crack, for all the world like the noise of an electric spark. Bulger was delighted with this performance, and on one occasion, not being able to control his feeling, he uttered a sharp bark, whereupon apparently 10,000 of these little torch-bearers snapped their tails at me at the same instant and filled the vast place with a flash of light almost lightning-like intensity. Bulger was so frightened by the result of his applause that he took great care to keep quiet after this. There you go. Well, that's 2 chapters. 5 and 6. This story's getting good now. He's found the place he's going. And it'll be fun to continue this story. Stay tuned. Catch up on anything you missed in the Storytime playlist. Until next time, we'll try and cover more 2 chapters of Baron Trump's marvelous underground journey. See you next time.